The Galactic Council chamber looked like someone had given a Baroque palace and a spaceship a very confusing night together. Floating chandeliers made of crystallized starlight hung from a ceiling that technically did not exist in three-dimensional space, and the walls were covered in enough gold filigree to bankrupt a solar system. Which, funny enough, is exactly what happened to the Varelian Empire when they volunteered to host this year's summit. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Krelnock of Zalthuvia. Resplendent in his ceremonial robes that shimmered with colors the human eye was not really equipped to process without getting a migraine. All four of his arms were spread wide in what his species considered a gesture of profound significance, but which made him look like he was trying to hug a really wide tree. "Behold," Krelnock announced, his voice booming through the translation matrix, with the kind of gravity usually reserved for funeral dirges or tax audits. "The culmination of 1,000 years of spiritual dedication, metallurgical perfection, and cosmic alignment. I present to you all the Zalthuvian Death Whisper." The lights dimmed. Dramatic music swelled from nowhere in particular. A floating platform descended from the ceiling, bathed in a spotlight that seemed to have its own dramatic aspirations. And there, resting on a cushion made from the shed scales of the last Grand Dragon of Theta Prime, was a blade. It was, objectively speaking, a very nice blade. It glowed with an inner light that suggested it was either incredibly powerful or slightly radioactive, possibly both. The edge was so sharp it appeared to cut through the air itself, leaving little reality warps that made the space around it shimmer. 17 extinct star cores, Krelnock continued, now 90 minutes into his prepared speech and showing no signs of slowing down. The tears of 600 warrior monks, collected during their 1,000-day meditation of suffering, forged in the heart of a collapsing neutron star, cooled in the ice fields of the void between voids, and blessed by every deity in the Zalthuvian pantheon, even the minor ones responsible for favorable grain harvests and non-squeaky door hinges. In the back corner of the chamber, near the refreshments table that nobody was touching because Glorbaxian cuisine looked like it was still trying to escape the serving dishes, Dave Thompson was eating chocolate pudding. Dave was human, which already made him something of an oddity at these council gatherings, but he was specifically a maintenance technician, which made him about as relevant to galactic politics as a potted plant. Less relevant, actually, since the Phytosian delegate was literally a potted plant and had full voting rights. He had stumbled into this mess purely by accident. His shift supervisor, Lieutenant Patricia Gomez, had sent him to fix a malfunctioning atmospheric recycler near the council chambers, and Dave had made the critical error of finishing early. Now he was stuck here until the boring speeches ended, because leaving in the middle would apparently cause an interstellar diplomatic incident. So pudding it was. "The handle," Krelnock was saying, now 2 hours in and somehow still on the same sentence, "is wrapped in the hide of the eternal beast of Knarox, which died of old age after 17 million years of life, and therefore represents the patient wisdom required to truly master such a weapon." Dave scraped the last bit of pudding from his cup. He wondered idly if anyone would notice if he went back for seconds. Probably not. Most of the delegates looked like they had achieved some kind of standing meditation state, their eyes glazed over in the universal expression of people trapped in a meeting that should have been an email. And thus, Krelnock finally concluded, raising all four arms to the heavens, or whatever passed for heavens in this dimension, the Zalthuvian Death Whisper stands as the ultimate expression of civilization itself, the pinnacle of what a species can achieve when they dedicate themselves to true perfection, unburdened by the primitive need for haste or practicality. Polite applause rippled through the chamber. Several delegates were definitely crying, though whether from emotion or sheer relief that the speech had ended was up for debate. That was when Krelnock's eyes, all three of them, landed on Dave. "You there," the ambassador said, his voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for people who talk in movie theaters. "Human, are you eating during this sacred presentation?" Dave looked down at his empty pudding cup, then back up at Krelnock. "Not anymore," he said reasonably. "I finished like 20 minutes ago." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. A Frostborn delegate nodded approvingly, mistaking the sudden tension for proper climate control. Krelnock's face went through several colors that definitely were not in the standard humanoid emotional spectrum. "You mock the dedication of my people with your casual disregard?" "I mean," Dave said, carefully setting down his plastic spoon. "No offense, but it was a really long speech about a knife." Somewhere in the diplomatic section, someone made a sound like a small star dying. You could have heard a pin drop in the Galactic Council chamber, assuming pins made sounds in a room with artificially controlled acoustics and 17 different atmosphere types. What you actually heard was the Frostborn delegate's body temperature regulator kicking into overdrive, which sounded like an asthmatic refrigerator. Krelnock drew himself up to his full height, which was impressive considering he was already 8 feet tall and had apparently been slouching this whole time. His ceremonial robes billowed in a wind that definitely was not coming from the ventilation system. Because Dave had just fixed that, and it did not billow anything. A knife? The ambassador's voice could have etched glass. A knife? This is the Zalthuvian death whisper, forged over 10 centuries of devoted craftsmanship, and you reduce it to the status of a common utensil? Dave shrugged. I mean, it cuts stuff, right? That is kind of the defining feature of knives. Lieutenant Patricia Gomez, who had been standing near the diplomatic entrance, hoping nobody would notice her wayward maintenance tech, closed her eyes and began mentally composing her resignation letter. She was up to the 3rd apology paragraph when Krelnock spoke again. Then perhaps, the ambassador said, his voice now smooth as poisoned honey, you would like to demonstrate humanity's equivalent achievement? Surely your species, in its infinite wisdom, has created a weapon worthy of comparison. The other council members perked up. This was interesting. The Galactic Council did not get much in the way of entertainment, unless you counted the time the Zeltron delegation accidentally declared war on their own planet due to a translation error. This had potential. Oh, this is happening, whispered Counselor Thresh, a lizard-like being from Saurix Prime who had been bored out of his scales for the past 3 hours. Please let this be happening. Dave looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the ceiling, clearly pretending she had never met him before in her life. Dave looked back at Krelnock. You want me to make a weapon? I am issuing a formal challenge of craft, Krelnock announced, and the capital letters were definitely audible this time. As is my right under Article 7, Section 3, Subsection 12 of the Council Charter regarding cultural demonstrations and the defense of ceremonial honor. A holographic display helpfully appeared in the center of the room, showing the relevant legal text. It was written in 47 languages simultaneously, which made it look like someone had thrown alphabet soup at a disco ball. Each species demonstrates their greatest achievement in weapon crafting, Krelnock continued. The Council will judge. The winner receives official recognition, ceremonial privileges, and, he paused dramatically, priority parking designation Alpha in the Council Station's central hub. A collective gasp went through the chamber. Priority parking Alpha was the stuff of legends. It was exactly 15 steps from the main elevator and had its own gravitational stabilizer, so you never had to worry about your vehicle drifting into the void. Delegates had negotiated trade agreements for less. Dave was still holding his empty pudding cup. He looked at it. He looked at the death whisper, still glowing ominously on its floating platform. He looked at Krelnock's smug expression, all 3 eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. Sure, Dave said. Yeah, okay. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a dozen species collectively wondering if they had heard correctly, or if the translation matrix had finally given up and started making things up for its own amusement. Patricia's resignation letter now included a section about seeking employment in a different galaxy entirely. You accept? Krelnock could not quite keep the glee out of his voice. This was perfect. He would humiliate these upstart humans and their ridiculous species who had only been in space for a few centuries. They probably still used projectile weapons and thought duct tape was advanced technology. Sure, Dave repeated. When do you want to do this? The Grand Arena. 1 standard galactic week. That should give you adequate time to prepare your submission and contemplate the magnitude of your error. Dave scratched his chin. Can we do it tomorrow? I have Thursday off and was planning to catch up on sleep. Krelnock's face went through that color spectrum again, settling on something between burgundy and ultraviolet. Tomorrow, you would create your species' greatest weapon crafting. Achievement in 1 day? I mean, probably less. How long do I actually have? The ambassador's smile was the kind of expression predators made right before they pounced. The demonstration is scheduled for 3rd sun position. Shall we say 6 standard hours of preparation time? Works for me. Dave tossed his pudding cup toward the recycling chute. It missed. He shuffled over to pick it up, apparently unconcerned that he had just agreed to a technological showdown with a civilization that had been spacefaring since humans were still figuring out bronze. As the council chamber dissolved into excited chatter and the rapid exchange of betting pools, Patricia finally walked over to Dave. Do you have any idea what you just did? She hissed. Dave dropped the pudding cup into the recycler on his second attempt. Got us a shot at that parking spot? Because honestly, the walk from level 7 is killing my knees. You just challenged a civilization that spent 1,000 years making one. Weapon. What could you possibly create that would compete with that? Dave considered this. I will figure something out. I am pretty good at figuring things out. You fixed the atmospheric recycler by hitting it with a wrench. And it worked, did it not? Patricia had no response to that. Mostly because he was right, and that somehow made it worse. The Grand Arena was not technically grand so much as it was large and willing to host events on short notice. It occupied the center of Council Station Omega, a massive dome that could simulate any environment, from methane swamps to hard vacuum. Today, it was configured for maximum dramatic effect, which meant floating platforms, holographic displays, and lighting that suggested someone had given a theater major unlimited control over an alien power grid. Krelnok's preparation area looked like a meditation retreat had merged with a particle accelerator and produced offspring. 17 floating platforms surrounded the central workspace, each one holding a different component of what was apparently going to be a very elaborate demonstration. Warrior monks in matching robes hummed in harmonic frequencies that made the air shimmer. One platform had an actual miniature star contained in a stasis field. Another held crystals that radiated an aura of existential significance. We begin with the ritual of cosmic alignment, Krelnok announced to the gathering crowd of delegates, who had absolutely nothing better to do than watch this. As our ancestors did 1,000 years ago, we must first attune ourselves to the universal frequencies of creation itself. The monks began chanting. The star pulsed. Holographic charts appeared, showing planetary alignments, cosmic energy flows, and what looked suspiciously like an astrological forecast. Incense that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously filled the air with a scent that the human brain interpreted as purple, which was confusing but not entirely unpleasant. Next, we must sacrifice the tears of eternity to the Forge of Ages, Krelnok continued, clearly having prepared this performance with the attention to detail usually reserved for royal weddings or hostage negotiations. A procession of attendants carried forward a crystalline vessel containing liquid that glowed with inner light. They poured it slowly, reverently, onto a floating anvil that had been carved from a single massive diamond. The liquid hissed and steamed, and the holograms updated to show molecular structures rearranging themselves in mathematically perfect patterns. The process cannot be rushed, Krelnok said, shooting a pointed look at where Dave was supposed to be setting up. True craftsmanship requires patience, dedication, and respect for the ancient ways. On the opposite side of the arena, Dave's preparation area was empty. Patricia stood at the edge of the designated workspace, checking her communicator for the 15th time in as many minutes. Where is he? She muttered. The demonstration starts in 4 hours. Counselor Thresh, who had wandered over with a bag of what looked like popcorn but was actually freeze-dried moon larvae, shrugged his scaled shoulders. Maybe he realized he was in over his head? Smart choice, honestly. I have seen Krelnok when he wins arguments. It is not pretty. Well, it is pretty. Very choreographed. But brutal. Dave does not really do smart choices, Patricia said. He once tried to repair a plasma conduit while it was still active because shutting it down would have taken an extra 10 minutes. Did he survive? Obviously. But his eyebrows took 2 months to grow back. A door hissed open at the far end of the arena. Dave shuffled in, still wearing his maintenance uniform with its collection of mysterious stains and a name tag that was slightly crooked. He was carrying a toolbox in one hand and dragging something behind him with the other. It was a maintenance cart, the kind with squeaky wheels that every space station seemed to have at least 40 of. Sorry I'm late, Dave called out. Had to finish replacing the door seals on level 19. Someone kept complaining about the draft. He rolled the cart to his designated area and started unpacking. The contents were not promising. A grinding wheel, clearly borrowed from the machine shop, a can of industrial lubricant, a roll of duct tape, a half-eaten sandwich, which he set aside for later, and sitting on top of the pile like a crown jewel of mundane utility, a standard-issue plastic cafeteria spoon. The crowd that had been watching Krelnok's elaborate ritual slowly turned to stare at Dave's setup. There was a quality to the silence that suggested mass confusion bordering on concern. Is he? Counselor Thresh said slowly. Is he going to make a weapon out of a spoon? Patricia closed her eyes. Probably. That is amazing. That is not the word I would use. Dave plugged in the grinding wheel, which hummed to life with all the majesty of a particularly motivated desk fan. He held up the spoon, examined it from several angles with the critical eye of someone evaluating a potential investment property, and then pressed it against the spinning wheel. Sparks flew. Not mystical sparks infused with the power of dying stars, just regular sparks like you would see in any workshop anywhere. The plastic melted slightly, filling the air with a smell that could generously be described as chemical, and less generously as vaguely toxic. "He is sharpening a spoon," breathed a crystalline delegate, whose body literally chimed when surprised. The chiming continued for several seconds. Across the arena, Krelnok's cosmic ritual had reached a fever pitch. The monks were now chanting in 17-part harmony. The miniature star was doing something that defied physics, but looked really impressive. Energy flowed between the platforms in patterns that would have made sacred geometrists weep with joy. Dave tested the spoons, edge with his thumb, decided it was not quite right, and went back to the grinding wheel. 20 minutes later, he unplugged the grinder, wiped the spoon on his uniform pants, and held it up to the light. The handle was still clearly a cafeteria spoon. The business end, however, now came to a point that looked like it meant business, albeit confused business that was not entirely sure how it got there. "Done," Dave announced to nobody in particular. Patricia walked over and stared at the sharpened spoon, then at Dave, then back at the spoon. "That is it? What do you mean that is it? Look at that edge. You could perform surgery with this thing. Probably not good surgery, but surgery. Dave. They spent 1,000 years forging their blade using the tears of monks and extinct stars. Yeah, but I got mine done during lunch break, and I still have time for a sandwich." He picked up the half-eaten sandwich from earlier and took a bite. See? Time management. In the background, Krelnok's ritual reached its crescendo. Light exploded from the central platform in a kaleidoscope of cosmic significance. The Death Whisper appeared, floating on a cushion of pure energy, still looking absolutely magnificent and definitely not like a sharpened cafeteria utensil. The arena's announcement system crackled to life. "Demonstrations will begin in 5 minutes. Participants, please take your positions." Dave finished his sandwich and stuck the sharpened spoon in his tool belt like it was the most natural thing in the world. Counselor Thresh turned to Patricia. "I have bet 3 months of my grain stipend on the human. Please tell me I did not make a terrible mistake." Patricia watched Dave wipe crumbs off his shirt onto the arena floor. "I honestly have no idea anymore." The grand arena had filled to capacity, which was impressive considering most council members usually treated mandatory demonstrations the way children treated dentist appointments. But word had spread through the station faster than a hull breach rumor. The human maintenance tech was going up against a 1,000-year-old blade with a sharpened spoon. This was either going to be the greatest upset in galactic history, or the most spectacular public humiliation since the Zentarii ambassador accidentally proposed marriage to a decorative fern. Krelnok stood on his platform, the Death Whisper floating beside him in all its reality-warping glory. He had changed into even more ceremonial robes, which seemed physically impossible, but here they were. His expression radiated the kind of confidence that came from knowing you had already won, and now just had to enjoy the victory lap. Dave stood on the opposite platform, hands in his pockets. The sharpened spoon stuck through his tool belt like a gunslinger from ancient Earth westerns. He had not changed clothes. There was still duct tape on his shirt from earlier. The Grand Arbiter, a floating sphere of crystallized bureaucracy named "Protocols Must Be Observed," drifted to the center position. Its voice emerged from somewhere within its geometric form, dry as vacuum and twice as empty of emotion. "We are gathered to witness a challenge of craft between Zalthuvia and humanity. First demonstration will be provided by Ambassador Krelnok. You may begin." Krelnok bowed deeply, all 4 arms sweeping in synchronized arcs that had definitely been practiced. "Honored Council, what you are about to witness represents the pinnacle of Zalthuvian achievement. The Death Whisper is not merely a weapon, it is a philosophy made manifest." Music swelled from hidden speakers. Holographic displays lit up the arena, showing the 1,000-year forging process in dramatic time-lapse. Warrior monks meditating for decades, stars collapsing in slow motion, the blade taking shape in cosmic fires that existed beyond normal space-time. "Observe its capabilities," Krelnok said, and gestured to the test dummy that had been set up at the far playing end of the arena. It was not a standard test dummy. This was a Mark 7 combat drone, military grade, with armor plating that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. Its shields alone cost more than some planetary economies. 3 civilizations had gone to war over the mining rights to the materials in its hull. Krelnok raised the Death Whisper. The blade sang, an actual audible note that resonated in frequencies most species could not even hear but definitely felt in their bones or equivalent skeletal structures. He moved in a pattern that was part martial art, part interpretive dance, and entirely calculated for maximum dramatic impact. The blade passed through the air, and reality itself seemed to part around it. Space warped, light bent. Somewhere, a physicist was probably having a breakdown trying to explain what was happening to the laws of thermodynamics. Krelnock struck. The death whisper passed through the combat drone like it was not there. Because, for a brief moment on a quantum level, it was not there. The blade cut through molecular bonds, severed energy fields, and generally made the universe's fundamental forces look amateur. The drone fell apart in perfect geometric sections, each piece still sparking with residual energy. The crowd gasped. Several delegates applauded. One fainted. But they were from a species that fainted at everything, so it barely counted. As you can see, Krelnock said, not even breathing hard, the death whisper transcends conventional weaponry. It exists partially outside our dimensional framework, allowing it to bypass all known defenses. It is art. It is science. It is the culmination of everything a civilization can achieve. He placed the blade back on its floating cushion with reverent care, then turned to Dave with a smile that could have flash-frozen a sun. Now then, human, please demonstrate your, contribution. Dave pulled the spoon from his belt and walked to the center of his platform. No music, no holograms, just a guy holding a sharpened piece of cafeteria cutlery under harsh arena lighting that was not doing his complexion any favors. Right, Dave said. So, I sharpened a spoon. Protocols must be observed, bobbed uncertainly. Will there be ceremonial context? Nah, it is just a sharpened spoon. Took about 20 minutes with a grinding wheel from the machine shop. Would have been 15, but I had to take a call about a clogged air filter on level 8. The crowd murmured. Counselor Thresh leaned forward, his larvae popcorn forgotten. Patricia had her face in her hands. Krelnock's expression was pure vindication. You see? This is the difference between true civilization and primitive improvisation. A spoon, sharpened with power tools. No ritual, no dedication, no respect for the craft itself. Yeah, but does your knife work? Dave asked. You just witnessed it dismantle a combat drone worth 3 planetary economies. Cool. But can you use it? Right, now. Without the meditation and the star alignment and the 17 monks doing their harmonic thing? Krelnock's eyes narrowed. The death whisper requires attunement to wield properly. Yes, it is a sophisticated instrument. So that is a no. Dave turned to the Arbiter. Can I get another one of those combat drones? A second Mark 7 materialized at the far end of the arena, shields humming, armor plating gleaming under the lights. It looked expensive and extremely difficult to destroy. Dave weighed the spoon in his hand once, twice, like he was testing its balance. Then, without any ceremony or warning or dramatic buildup whatsoever, he flicked it. The sharpened spoon flew through the air, spinning end over end in a way that definitely violated several principles of aerodynamics. It should not have flown straight. It should not have maintained velocity. It definitely should not have punched directly through the combat drone's shield matrix, central processor, and out the other side before embedding itself in the arena wall. The drone sparked once, made a sound like a disappointed computer, and collapsed. Silence. The kind of silence that happened when an entire room full of highly intelligent beings simultaneously tried to recalculate their understanding of physics, probability, and whether they had been taking humans seriously enough. Dave shrugged. Sometimes you just need to stab something and you do not have 1,000 years to meditate about it first. That is kind of humanity's whole deal. We figure it out as we go. He walked over to the wall and worked the spoon free with some effort. It was slightly bent now, but the edge was still sharp. Plus, Dave added, examining the spoon, I can make another one of these in 20 minutes if I lose it. How long does it take to forge another death whisper? Krelnock opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. His face cycled through that color spectrum again, this time adding a few shades. That probably required medical attention. But, the ambassador finally managed. But that is impossible. You cannot simply. The complexity alone, the energy requirements. I mean, I did though. Dave held up the spoon. Right here. Works pretty good. Cost me nothing but 20 minutes and a spoon from the cafeteria. They have like 5,000 of those things. Counselor Thresh stood up. his larvae popcorn spilling everywhere. That was the most human thing I have ever seen, and I once watched a human try to fight a door that said pull when they were pushing. The arena erupted into chaos. Delegates were shouting, arguing, frantically updating betting pools. The holographic displays were showing instant replays from 17 different angles, none of which made the physics make any more sense. Protocols must be observed, spun in place, its geometric form flickering with what might have been confusion, or possibly a software crash. And Dave just stood there, spoon in hand, looking like he would rather be literally anywhere else. Krelnock was having what could diplomatically be described as a moment, and less diplomatically be described as a complete existential collapse with witnesses. His ceremonial robes were disheveled. 2 of his forearms were gesticulating wildly, while the other 2 seemed to have given up entirely and hung limp at his sides. His face had settled on a color somewhere between eggplant and imminent cardiac event. "This is a mockery," he shouted, his voice cracking on the second syllable. "A deliberate insult to 10 centuries of Zalthuvian tradition. You cannot simply, you do not just, one does not take a spoon and sharpen it?" Dave offered helpfully. "Yes, no. I mean, that is not the point." Krelnock was pacing now, his platform wobbling slightly under the erratic movement. "The death whisper represents the accumulated wisdom of ages, the dedication of generations, the sacrifice of warriors who gave their lives to perfect the craft." "That is kind of my point, though," Dave said, still examining his spoon for any damage. "Why would you need people to die to make a knife? That seems inefficient." A strangled sound emerged from Krelnock that might have been a sob or possibly a war cry. It was hard to tell. "You do not understand. The ritual is sacred. The process itself is what gives the weapon meaning. Without the 1,000 years of dedication, the meditation, the cosmic alignment, it is merely a knife that works." Krelnock pointed one shaking finger at Dave. "Your primitive mind cannot grasp the philosophical significance of what you have done. You have taken something sacred and reduced it to nothing but, to just practical application," suggested Counselor Thresh, who was clearly enjoying this way too much. The Zalthuvian ambassador whirled on him. "Whose side are you on?" "I am on the side of entertainment, and this is the best thing that has happened at Manor Council Station since someone accidentally vented the buffet into space." Thresh crunched another moon larva. "No offense to your traditions, but the human has a point. What good is a weapon nobody can actually use?" "It is not about using it." Krelnock's voice had reached frequencies that were starting to make the arena's windows vibrate. "It is about what it represents, the journey, the meaning." "Okay, but like," Dave said, "what if you need to stab something today? Not in 1,000 years. Today. Right now. What do you do?" Krelnock stared at him. One would begin the preparatory rituals, consult the sacred texts, align ourselves with the cosmic frequencies. So you would die. You would just die while the thing you needed to stab was stabbing you. That is not. You are oversimplifying a complex theological and philosophical framework. I am really not, though. Dave stuck the spoon back in his tool belt. Look, I am not saying your knife is not impressive. It is very impressive, very shiny. Probably cost a lot. But my spoon cost nothing, took 20 minutes, and actually worked when I needed it to. That is the human way. We do not have time to wait around for cosmic alignment. We have stuff to fix, problems to solve, and like 15 other work orders to get through before my shift ends. A new voice entered the conversation. Delegate Vix Ara of the Insectoid Collective, whose species had been part of the council for 6,000 years, clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "If I may," she said, her translator rendering her chittering into a pleasant contralto. "This discussion raises certain questions about our own ceremonial weapons." "What questions?" Krelnock demanded, looking for an ally. "Well, the Singing Scythe of Doom, our most sacred blade, required 3 centuries to forge, and can only be wielded during the 3rd moon phase of our harvest season by someone born under specific stellar alignments." "Yes, exactly. This is proper respect for tradition!" Vix Ara's antennae drooped slightly. "It has not actually cut anything in about 300 years. We mostly just polish it and sing to it during festivals." The arena went very quiet. "It is decorative?" Dave asked. "Largely ceremonial at this point, yes." "So you are saying," Counselor Thresh said slowly, his scales rippling with barely suppressed amusement, "that your most sacred weapon is essentially a very expensive wall ornament that you occasionally take down to sing at? When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. but in context there is significant cultural meaning. Vixera trailed off, her mandibles clicking uncertainly. Another delegate stood up. This one was from the Photonic Collective, a being of pure energy contained in a vaguely humanoid force field. Our blade of eternal radiance requires a quantum consciousness to even perceive, let alone wield. Only 3 beings in our entire history have been able to use it. Can they use it now? Dave asked. They achieved enlightenment and transcended physical existence approximately 2,000 years ago. So, no. Technically no, but spiritually they are always with us. And it is decorative too, is it not? Thresh was grinning now, showing way too many teeth. The photonic delegate flickered awkwardly. The ceremonial shelf where we display it is very nice. All around the arena, delegates were starting to shift uncomfortably. Hushed conversations broke out. Someone was frantically checking notes on a datapad. Another delegate left hurriedly, possibly to go look at their own ceremonial weapons, with fresh eyes and mounting concern. Krelnok stood in the center of his platform, the death whisper still floating beside him in all its magnificent, completely impractical glory. His face had gone from eggplant to a sort of pale gray that suggested his entire worldview was currently being dismantled by a maintenance technician with a sharpened spoon. "This is not," he said, weakly. "This is not about practicality. It is about meaning, about tradition, about the values we pass down through generations." "Sure," Dave said, not unkindly, "but maybe also make sure the thing actually works? Like, have your meaningful traditions and your 1,000-year knives. That is great. But maybe also keep a sharpened spoon around for when you actually need to stab something and do not have 10 centuries to spare." Patricia, who had been watching this entire debacle with the resigned expression of someone whose job performance review was going to be very interesting, finally spoke up. "Can we please just decide who wins so I can get Dave back to work? The plasma filters on level 12 are not going to replace themselves." Protocols must be observed, who had been suspiciously quiet during the entire meltdown, rotated slowly. After deliberation, the council recognizes that both demonstrations showcased cultural values. However, the criteria specified practical demonstration of weapon crafting achievement. The human submission met all specified parameters and demonstrated immediate utility without prerequisite conditions. "No," Krelnok whispered. "The challenge of craft is awarded to humanity. Priority parking designation Alpha is hereby transferred." "No." Also, there is a new council subcommittee being formed to review ceremonial versus practical weapon classifications. Volunteers are welcome. Krelnok collapsed onto his platform, all 4 arms covering his face. The warrior monks looked at each other uncertainly. The miniature star in the stasis field pulsed sympathetically. Dave just shrugged and headed for the exit. "Cool. Patricia, can we stop by the cafeteria? I need another spoon. This one is kind of bent." 3 weeks later, Dave pulled into priority parking designation Alpha in his beat-up maintenance shuttle that was held together by duct tape, optimism, and what he strongly suspected was divine intervention. The parking spot was, he had to admit, pretty nice. Only 15 steps from the main elevator, its own gravitational stabilizer, and a little holographic sign that now read, "Reserved for Challenge of Craft Victor," in 47 languages. He grabbed his toolbox and headed inside, nodding to the Frostborn security guard who had stopped asking for his credentials after the 2nd week of seeing him park there. The council station had returned to its normal rhythm of bureaucratic tedium and diplomatic incidents, but things were subtly different. Dave noticed it in small ways. Delegates who previously would not have acknowledged his existence now nodded as he passed. Someone had left a basket of exotic fruits outside his workspace with a note that said, "From the Insectoid Collective, with appreciation for perspective." He was pretty sure one of them was still alive and trying to escape, so he had left the basket in the break room as someone else's problem. The biggest change, however, was currently standing outside Conference Room 7 having what appeared to be a heated discussion with a crystalline therapist, whose body was chiming in soothing, therapeutic tones. Krelnok looked different. His ceremonial robes were gone, replaced by something that could almost be called business casual if your business was intergalactic diplomacy, and your casual was still worth more than a small moon. 3 of his 4 arms were gesturing animatedly, while the 4th was holding a datapad. "I am simply saying that perhaps, there is value in examining our attachment to tradition for tradition's sake," Krelnok was saying as Dave walked past. The therapist chimed in agreement. "This is excellent progress, Ambassador. Last week you were still insisting the human had used dark sorcery. I may have been experiencing denial as a coping mechanism for existential reevaluation." Very good. And how do you feel about that now? Krelnock noticed Dave and froze. For a moment, the old indignation flickered across his face. Then something else replaced it. Something that might have been respect, or possibly just exhaustion. Thompson, he said carefully. Ambassador, Dave replied, pausing. How are you doing? I am processing. My therapist believes I experienced what humans call an identity crisis, when my core beliefs about cultural superiority were challenged by a sharpened cafeteria utensil. That is rough, buddy. Indeed. Krelnock hesitated. I wanted to. That is, I have been meaning to. What I am attempting to express is... He stopped, gathered himself. Your demonstration was effective. Dave blinked. Thanks? And perhaps, possibly, it is conceivable that Zalthuvian culture has placed excessive emphasis on ceremonial achievement at the expense of practical application. The crystalline therapist chimed so enthusiastically it sounded like wind chimes in. A hurricane! That is great, Dave said, genuinely meaning it. Self-awareness is important. The Death Whisper has been placed in the Cultural Heritage Museum, Krelnock continued, where it will be properly appreciated for its historical and artistic significance rather than its utility as an actual weapon. That sounds like a good spot for it. Meanwhile, the Zalthuvian military has requested 17,000 sharpened spoons for their rapid response units. Dave tried very hard not to laugh. He mostly succeeded. That is very practical of them. They are calling them Emergency Expedient Piercing Implements. The acronym is unfortunately unsatisfactory, but the logistics division is pleased with the cost-effectiveness. Krelnock's expression twisted into something that might have been a smile, or possibly indigestion. You have fundamentally altered my civilization's approach to military procurement, and I am not entirely certain how to feel about that. If it helps, I mostly just wanted the parking spot. That does not help at all, but I appreciate your honesty, Krelnock glanced at his datapad. I must go. I am due in a council subcommittee meeting about practical versus ceremonial classification standards. It is deeply boring but apparently necessary. He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. Thompson, your species is infuriating, irreverent, and entirely too comfortable with improvisation. Yeah, that tracks. The galaxy is better for having you in it. Before Dave could respond, Krelnock strode off with his therapist, chiming supportively beside him, leaving Dave standing in the corridor wondering if he had just made a friend or simply traumatized someone into Stockholm Syndrome. Patricia found him there 5 minutes later, still holding his toolbox and looking contemplative. There you are, she said. We have got a situation on level 9. Someone tried to modify their quarters without authorization, and now the gravity is inverted in 3 rooms, and normal in the hallway between them. How is that even possible? I have stopped asking how, and started just accepting that physics is more of a suggestion on this station. She noticed his expression. What is wrong with you? You look weird. I think Krelnock just thanked me for psychologically devastating his entire culture. Well, you did get them to order 17,000 spoons. 17,000? Military procurement works fast when you cut out the 1,000-year meditation requirement. Patricia started walking, and Dave fell into step beside her. Also, you have been formally invited to speak at the Galactic Symposium on Practical Innovation next month. Absolutely not. They are offering to name a conference room after you. Still. No, the catering is supposed to be amazing. 40 different species, 40 different cuisines. Dave considered this. Will there be pudding? I assume so. I will think about it. They reached the elevator, and Dave pressed the button for level 9. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal. Still the same maintenance tech in a stained uniform with a crooked name tag. Still carrying a toolbox held together with zip ties and hope. Still just a guy who sharpened a spoon because he had 20 minutes to kill and a grinding wheel handy. Somehow, that guy had changed galactic military procurement standards, spawned a council subcommittee, and given an ambassador an identity crisis that required professional therapeutic intervention. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened onto level 9, where someone's unauthorized gravity modifications had resulted in furniture floating in geometric patterns that would have made an artist weep. Right, Dave said, setting down his toolbox. Let us fix this. Patricia pulled up the schematics on her datapad. You know, for someone who just won a challenge of craft against a 1,000-year-old blade, you seem very calm about the whole thing. Dave was already pulling out his tools, including, yes, another spoon he had sharpened during his lunch break, just in case. I mean, it was just a sharpened spoon. Not really that complicated. You fundamentally altered multiple civilizations' approaches to weapon development with a cafeteria utensil. Sure. But before I did that, I had to fix an atmospheric recycler, replace some door seals, and take a call about a clogged air filter. He looked at the floating furniture. And now I have to deal with this gravity situation. The spoon thing was just, something that happened in between. Patricia shook her head, smiling despite herself. Most human answer ever. I will take that as a compliment. It was not a compliment. I'm still taking it as one. Above them, a chair drifted past in lazy spirals, spinning slowly in the inverted gravity field. Somewhere on the station, Krelnock was learning to cope with the fact that sometimes the best solution was not the most elaborate one. The Death Whisper sat in a museum, beautiful and useless, and 17,000 sharpened spoons were being distributed to soldiers who were probably very confused but appreciative of the cost savings. Dave pulled out his wrench and got to work. Because that was the thing about humans, really. They did not wait 1,000 years when 20 minutes would do. They did not build elaborate ceremonies when simple solutions existed. They just figured it out, fixed it, and moved on to the next problem. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Even if it came with a side of existential crisis in a parking spot.